Well, let's turn now to that disastrous polling on The Voice that I mentioned at the start of the program. Joining me now is Leo Shanahan, Director of Freshwater Strategy Consultancy Group. Leo, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sharri.
Look, before we get into The Voice, I just want to start with overall what the polling shows about Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese. It shows that right now Dutton still isn't very popular. Albanese, however, seems to be more popular than ever. He's barely had a dent. And the Labor Party, you know, we're almost, coming up to a year in since the election. This is a very long honeymoon. Yeah,
it's huge. I mean, King Albo's reign continues. He's probably more popular than King Charles anyway. I mean, and to put it mildly, Peter Dutton is still not very popular at all. Those approval ratings, you know, he's got a -17. Anthony Albanese on approval is still is mildly down, but since December on our last poll. But as preferred Prime Minister, he's got a substantial 23-point lead over Peter Dutton. And the question is, where does he go from here, having only picked up 3 points on the Prime Minister?
Yeah. OK, let's turn to your polling on The Voice now. 24% of people are still undecided. What I think is fascinating is when people were first asked whether they back The Voice or not, 42% said they did, 34% said they didn't. But when they were squeezed to give an answer, you know, if they were pushed which way would they vote, it came in at about 56% said they would back The Voice. This isn't a very strong number, especially 5 or 6 months out from the referendum.
No, it's not. It's fair to say, however, you should say that on these figures, a referendum would still get over the line.
If it was held today.
If it was held today, especially if it got in those states. However, you're right. When you squeeze these numbers on what you'd call a kind of 2PP, you get only 56%. Now, on pure numbers, it's only at 42%. So that's down 8% since December, Sharri. So that's a real worry for the government. And as you said, you've got that undecided at 24%. You squeeze them in, you get 56 to 44. These ain't great numbers for a referendum to be held later this year.
Yeah, so 8% it's fallen since December, but then you tracked all the published polls going back to May last year. So looking at about a year, and it shows that support for The Voice has come right down from around 77% a year ago to what it is now.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll have a look at that graph on the screen now.
This is a really telling slide. If you look at these published polls, the trend for the Voice among those polls since May last year, where it was up high 70s, almost up to 80, the trend is clearly down, and we're kind of our latest poll is really at the bottom of that trend now, as we said, in that kind of 55, mid-50s mark. But the crucial question now for the government is where that bottoms out, because the trend is clearly down. And for some, I suppose, some consolation for the opposition leader is showing that since he's come out with his position on The Voice, now it's very early days, that the trend continues to be down. And when squeezed after those two propositions, both the Labor proposition and the coalition proposition, support for The Voice was actually down overall. That is to say, there were more people were not supporting The Voice after they were squeezed, having seen those two propositions by the major parties.
I mean, a year ago, when people were indicating overwhelmingly up that 77% that they did support The Voice, we hadn't seen the model yet. We hadn't seen the question. We've had in the public, senior members of the Indigenous community, also quite strong vocal yes campaigners come out, people like Frank Brennan, and say that the model, that inclusion of the executive government, is too difficult. They're worried about legal challenges. Do you think it's this kind of debate that has given people second thoughts?
Yeah, it's called detail. It's called an actual question, because there wasn't any of that really prior that people could have a good look at. And now, the closer it comes and the more detail people get, the more concerned they are. I think a great parallel here is probably if you look at Brexit, where even though there was detail there, it was pretty clear a long way out from that referendum, there was large support for staying within the EU among the British populace, and it just went further and further down towards the vote, which obviously was a failure.
Look, this is high stakes for Anthony Albanese. He made clear when he held that big press conference alongside the Indigenous Working Group, when he announced the wording of the voice, he made it clear that this is what he sees as a big part of his legacy. This is what he wants his legacy to be. How do you think this would affect his prime ministership if it were to fail?
Oh, look, it's a political death match, really, at the moment. I mean, obviously there's a world where if the referendum were to fail, there is still a very good chance, you would think, that Anthony Albanese would be re-elected as Prime Minister, especially looking at these numbers. So still hugely popular. But he has gambled a lot of his political capital on this referendum. Now, conversely, so has Peter Dutton. This position for Peter Dutton, if ultimately the voice is successful, I should say, and Peter Dutton's position is not, you would have to think Peter Dutton's days as opposition leader are really numbered. And if there is a successful voice, the real question is, when does Anthony Albanese go to the election? Because that would be the trajectory you would think Labor Party would be on.
Yeah. All right, Leo Shanahan, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Sharri.